Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the BSP Research Huddle. This is the regular seminar series organized by the BSP Research Academy every Wednesday. We'd like to welcome everyone. In particular, we'd like to say good afternoon to Governor Eli Remalona. Thank you, Governor, for attending our Research Huddle seminar series for today. Thank you, sir. I'd also like to say hello and thank you for the rest of our BSP colleagues and my colleagues from the BSP Research Academy. So today we are featuring a research paper from one of our colleagues from the BSP Research Academy. The title of the research is Determinants of Foreign Trade in Services Across Regions in the Philippines. Our speaker is Miss Marie Edelweiss Romarate. Meg, as we call her, graduated from the University of the Philippines School of Economics with a Bachelor of Science in Economics. She started her career in the BSP under the policy unit of the International Operations Department, which formulates and reviews the BSP's regulations on foreign exchange transactions and conducts policy research on external debt, foreign investments, capital flows, and other external accounts. Meg completed her Master of Public Policy from the University of Tokyo as one of the 35 junior government officials across the Asia Pacific region awarded a scholarship under the Japan IMF Scholarship Program for Asia. She joined the BSP Research Academy as a research associate in 2021, where she is involved in the drafting of various research outputs, such as discussion papers and book chapters, as well as coordinating research activities for the BSP Research Academy. Her main research interests include international trade, environmental economics, and financial development. Our Research Huddle seminar series will last for an hour, and our presenter would have 30 minutes to present her research paper. Meg, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Governor Malona, BSP colleagues here on site, and everyone joining us online. Thank you, Ms. Laura, for your kind introduction. So I will be presenting the discussion paper, Determinants of Foreign Trade and Services Across Regions in the Philippines. So I started writing this back in 2021 when I just joined the BSP Research Academy, and this was released as a discussion paper on the BSP website in June last year. So this will be the outline of my presentation. I will first give an introduction on trade and services, then the research question that I try to answer in the paper. This will be followed by short sections on the literature, methodology, and data that I used. I will then discuss the results, some suggestions for future research, and conclude. Trade in services refers to the exchange of services between a resident in one economy or economic territory, which is usually a country, and a non-resident in another economic territory. And services are defined as the result of a production activity that changes the conditions of the consuming units or facilitates the exchange of products or financial assets. Since this exchange occurs between residents and non-residents, these are referred to as foreign or international trade in services to differentiate it from domestic trade, which occurs within the same economic territory. So this chart shows the Philippines foreign trade in services from 2000 to 2022 with the level of exports, imports, and total exports and imports of services as the bars and their share of GDP as the lines. So both exports and imports of services have been on an increasing trend since 2000 up to 2019. And these declined in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic, but they have recovered as of 2022, although they are still slightly below the figures in 2019. And since 2003, exports of services, which are the red bars, has consistently been higher than imports of services, which makes the Philippines a net exporter of services. As of end 2022, the total value of exports and imports of services is approximately 19.2% of our GDP. So there are several categories or components of services, and as of end 2022, these are the top categories of services trade in the Philippines. For exports, the majority of our services exports are business services, and this includes technical, trade-related, and other business services. So this is where the business process outsourcing services fall. As for services imports, the largest component is travel, and this covers expenditures of by residents of one economy when they travel to another economy, and they consume both goods and services such as accommodation, food, and other goods. When we look at the gross regional product, which is the value of all goods and services produced in the region, so includes both domestic and international trade, most of the regions in the Philippines are predominantly services-based compared to agriculture, forestry, and fishing and industry. So on the right side, the image is from a 2020 infographic from the Philippine Statistics Authority. It showed that the Region 4A or Calabarzon is the only predominantly industrial region, while the other 16 regions are predominantly services-based. And as of end 2022 data, this is still true. Most of the regions in the Philippines are services-based. So I showed you these figures to emphasize and demonstrate how services and trade in services in particular is an important driver of the Philippine economy. And in recent years, the World Trade Organization expects that services trade will be the new driver of global trade instead of goods or merchandise trade. So this brings me to my research question. Next slide, please. My research question is, what factors influence trade and services across regions of the Philippines? And the motivation is that by examining the factors that drive services trade, particularly of the region, we can further understand the dynamics of trade and services, and hopefully we can identify some policy measures to promote the resilience of services trade in all regions in the country. So next, some of the papers that I used guide me in my research. When I was reading the literature on trade and services, I really could not find a specific paper that looks at trade and services at a subnational level. So there are many papers written about the services industry as a whole, so including domestic trade. But as for international trade and services, there is not much written yet about the Philippines. As for other countries, there are many papers written on services trade. And these are some of the papers I found that focused on Asian countries or included countries in Asia. The first paper focused on the effect of the internet measured by the number of internet users per 100 people. And it used a sample of a mix of developing and advanced countries, and found that the number of internet users per 100 people, GDP, financial depth, and population are significant determinants of services trade. The next paper by Pham and Vu examined the determinants of services trade in Vietnam. And it found that the difference between the GDP per capita with their EU partner country, the population of the EU partner country, and the real exchange rate, among other factors, are significant determinants of their services trade. The third and fourth papers are very similar since they are both interested in the effect of in the role of information and communication technology as a determinant of services exports for Indonesia and ASEAN 5 respectively. So for ASEAN 5, for Indonesia, the significant determinants of services exports include the number of mobile cellular telephone subscriptions per 100 inhabitants, the GDP of Indonesia, the GDP of the partner ASEAN country, distance, and a common language, which is English. For ASEAN 5, they have similar results, but they also included additional ICT indicators such as an ICT development index, ICT access, ICT use, and ICT skills. So at the subnational level, since I could not really find papers that look at trade and services, I considered instead papers on trade that are done at regional or provincial level. So the first paper examined the factors affecting regional manufactured exports in South Africa and found that size of local GDP and distance to the nearest port are significant determinants of the manufactured exports of regions in South Africa. The second paper is an IMF working paper that analyzed the manufactured exports of provinces in Canada, and it found several determinants, such as labor productivity, real wages, FDI, population density, and so on. And the third paper on this slide focused on the role of roads and highway lengths on provincial exports in China. So using all these papers, I decided to use a panel data regression, which is the most common methodology that they used. And on the left side, we have the dependent variable, the exports of services. And I use 3 dependent variables, so exports of services, imports of services, and total exports and imports of services. For the independent variables, these are based on the literature. So for the first 3, I use as control variables the gross regional domestic product, consumer price index, gross capital formation, and XIT will be the other independent variables that I will discuss next. So the data that I used is for the 17 regions of the Philippines, and these are annual data. I used 2 sets of data from 2008 to 2020 and 2015 to 2020. Because at the time I was writing this in 2021, 2020 was the latest available data. And there are 2 sets of data because some of the variables are only available in recent years. So my dependent variables are taken from the Philippine Statistics Authority. And for the independent variables, so GRDP, CPI, GCF, population, net enrollment rate in secondary education, these are available from 2008 to 2020. The last 3 are from the PSA Survey on Information and Communication Technology, and these are available only in recent years, so they're only included in the data set for 2015 to 2020. And I used these as ICT indicators. The other independent variables, the minimum wage per region is from the National Wages and Productivity Commission under the Department of Labor and Employment. Total loan portfolio is from the BSP. And I also added something called the Cities and Municipalities Competitiveness Index Score, which is from the Department of Trade and Industry. It measures competitiveness of cities and municipalities across the Philippines. I also added a dummy variable for the presence of a services-related special economic zone using data from the PEZA. And services related special economic zone that I considered are IT centers, IT parks, tourism, and medical tourism parks. So for the regressions, I did two sets of regressions, random effects and fixed effects regressions. And although the Hausman test suggests that a random effects regression is preferred, if you look at the paper, I included both, as it was suggested that I include the fixed effects regression as a robustness check. And I have summarized in this table the significant independent variables. Since the tables are quite difficult to look at in a slide, I just indicated whether the effect was found to be positive or negative. And one asterisk indicates that this is for the longer data set from 2008 to 2020, while two asterisks indicate that it is significant for the data set from 2015 to 2020. And as you can see, based on this table, compared to the list of variables that I used, not all of them turned out to be significant. First, for gross regional domestic product, it is positive and it's consistent for all the three dependent variables. And this is consistent with the literature, where a local market size was also found to be positively related to trade and services. Gross capital formation, which is a measure of domestic investment, similarly has a positive effect on trade and services. Meanwhile, for consumer price index, it is negatively associated, and this is expected, as we expect that inflation will have a negative effect on trade and services. For the population, it is a negative, but this effect is only found in the shorter period of 2015 to 2020. And in the literature that I found, the effect of population is mixed. And one possible explanation for this is that when a population of a country or a region increases, they might rely more on internal trade instead of international trade. For the total loan portfolio of banks, both in gross and net terms, the effect is positive in general. And this is expected since the loans from banks may facilitate trade transactions for both exporters and importers. So this can be used for funding their payments for importers of services, or used as a source of funds to expand their services and provide services to their clients. However, there is a negative effect that's observed only for imports of services, and this is only for the shorter data set from 2015 to 2020. This variable was added as one of the suggestions that I received from colleagues in the BSP Research Academy. So actually in the literature, there's no similar finding. And the explanation that I thought of for why there is a negative effect of bank loans is that it is possible that the bank loans are not necessarily facilitating or funding payments for imports of services. So instead of importing services, they might be sourcing such services domestically instead. And finally, for the ICT indicators, the first is the number of establishments in the information economy. So it's simply a number. It is as defined by the PSA that are part of the information economy. And the effect found was a negative. And the possible explanation is that when these new establishments join, it is possible that they are not necessarily oriented toward services trade, or they're not aiming to export or import their services. So they might be catering to domestic demand instead. So although there are new establishments entering the information economy, this does not necessarily mean that they are contributing to services trade. So that's one possible reason why the effect that I found is negative. As for the proportion of establishments with internet access and proportion of establishments with e-commerce via the internet, which basically measures their internet access, they're both a positive, and it's also expected that higher internet access would be able to facilitate services trade. So the other variables which were not significant were the minimum wage, net enrollment rate in secondary education, the competitiveness score, and the dummy variable for the presence of a services-related special economic zone. So for future research, this topic can be re-examined, if not at the regional level, at the macro level, like most of the studies that I found. And the advantage would be it would have higher frequency data and a longer time series than I was able to use. If possible, it would also be better if there are additional variables, if this is available. For example, the education level, I used net enrollment rate in secondary education because there was no available similar data for education level at tertiary education, at least for the regional level in the Philippines. And this is because some services require higher skills. So you would expect that a more educated workforce would be able to contribute to trade in services better. As for the other indicators of ICT or internet access, since the indicators that I used is limited to the information economy, so it doesn't really capture the state of internet access in the Philippines. And it is also possible to do future research where the focus is on a specific sector or industry of services, since there are many categories and they have different characteristics and performance may be determined by different factors. And finally, this also suggested that I could refocus the paper. Instead of looking at the determinants of trade and services, instead I could look at it the other way and see what is the impact of trade and services on other variables such as growth and labor or employment. So although this paper is very preliminary, these are the key takeaways that I was able to come up with. To summarize, first, market size of the region, the GRDP, is associated with an increase in trade and services. Low inflation may help to encourage trade and services. Bank loans also appears to enable trade and services transactions. And finally, access to the internet is positively related to trade and services. Since trade and services is expected to continue to contribute to economic growth, I hope that research like this may serve as a starting point to further study and understand the factors that drive trade and services of the regions in the Philippines, so that the regions in the Philippines can take advantage of the growth opportunities associated with trade and services. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and any comments, suggestions are welcome so that I can improve this research, and it's also available on the BSP website at this link.
Thank you very much, Meg. Let's give her a round of applause, please. So thank you, Meg, for such an informative and definitely relevant research paper. And many interesting thoughts and further questions based on your conclusions and the results you have obtained from your research. Now, we would like to open the floor for question and answers. Because Meg was a bit earlier than her allotted time, very efficient in the use of her presentation time for today. We can open the floor for more questions. Originally, we are setting it up for 15 minutes, but we can allot up to 20 minutes for questions from the floor. We can start with any questions from the audience before we welcome or read some questions from the online participants. Any questions from our audience now, or would you like me to start with the online questions? Yes, Jade.
Hi, Meg. I'm just curious, the result on inflation, I'm just curious kasi what part of that would actually be masking wages? The result on inflation, what part of that would be masking wages in the area relative to wages in the yung nag-i-import ng services ng region?
I'm not, well, honestly, sir, I'm not sure how to answer the question since I didn't really consider like the interaction between the inflation and the regional minimum wage.
I can, siguro I can help out with that a little bit because I did the work on the price dynamics of minimum wages for regions. Actually, it's quite small. It's relatively small. If you consider the regional minimum wages, its impact on inflation is relatively small. Yeah, but what she used is minimum wages. So we don't really have a national standard wage kasi it is set by the regional tripartite committee. So it's actually regional wages. So as it is, any changes in the minimum wages per region has a relatively small impact on inflation. But of course, if it's big, then it will actually have a noticeable impact. But as it is, if it's just like, I think it's relatively small.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lee.
Thank you very much, Jade, for the question, and Faith for adding some insights into to the answer. Sorry, Jade has another set of questions. Jade, you would like me to read this, or would you like it to ask the question? So ako na lang daw po muna. But Neil, do you have? Okay, so anyway, habang naghahanda yung iba ng kanilang questions, para matuloy lang yung questions ni Jade, just to continue some of Jade's questions. Sorry. Anong saan? Okay, sorry about that. So Meg, first question, but sent by Jade online. How would the results differ if the trade-in services were broken down into final services or intermediate services? And second question, how much are trade barriers in services latent in the results you obtained? Would you like me to repeat it, Meg? So I'll repeat the first question. How would your results differ if the trade-in services were broken down into final services versus intermediate services? And secondly, how much are trade barriers in services latent in your results?
Okay, so for the first question, so for I'm not sure exactly which sectors would be considered the final services, But for like the intermediate services, which are usually embedded in the like manufacturing, and since these are, I think they would have, I think the factors would be different since for intermediate services, for example, for manufacturing services, then there's a physical component. And for example, maybe like capital or investment in capital goods might have a different impact compared to like services that don't need a physical component, such as those that are just purely digitally delivered. As for second question, sorry.
Second question was how much were trade barriers in services latent in the results?
So I didn't really consider trade barriers in my model at all, although that's a very relevant topic for when discussing trade and services. For example, in trade agreements, since trade and services is one of the important components in trade agreements. So how to bring the how to remove these barriers in trade and services. So maybe I can explore that in a future research. I think that would also be interesting. So thank you for the suggestion, Sir Jade. I'll try to look into that as well.
Thank you. Yes, Governor Eli Rebelona.
Thank you, Meg. I think it's a very interesting research. In terms of your future research, I particularly like the additional variables of educational level and focus on specific sector or industry. I realize the biggest the biggest sector is others, so that that may not be so so helpful, but nonetheless, I think you should try it. In terms of educational level, you're gonna distinguish between tertiary education and then less than tertiary education, right? Wala bang data on secondary as well, secondary education, A. And then B, wala bang data na regional on test scores? Because I know there's this whole database from the OECD on test scores, but that may be at the national level. Yung test scores of 15-year-olds in math or in reading and science. Wala ba tayong ganon at the regional? Kung meron, maganda sana yun. And then maybe a related paper, but a different paper maybe, not the same paper. It would be nice to look at the time series of how the industries evolve over time depending on the exchange rate. I know there's a big literature on the elasticity with respect to the exchange rate or the real exchange rate. And you have data going back to 2000. Maybe that's enough. I am not sure whether depending on the exchange rate, it makes services bigger or goods bigger. Because we're a predominantly services exporting country. Is that an exchange rate thing, or is it why is that the case? That would be, I think that would be interesting. But that might be a different paper, not the same paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor, for the suggestions. So for the educational levels, so far I could not find a similar data on like test scores at the regional level, but I will try to look at that OECD data, and for the future for the related research as well. They also sound very interesting. So maybe I could also look at in relation to the real exchange rate for another paper. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Goveli, for those insightful questions and suggestions. Thank you, Meg. Any questions on the floor? Hazel?
Thank you, Meg, again for your presentation, for your very nice paper. I was just wondering, Meg, if you tried to account for endogeneity issues like the reverse causality between your explanatory variables and your dependent variable.
Uh, I thank you, Ms. Hazel, for the question. So it's not in my presentation, but it's in my paper. So I also did another set of regressions with the lag dependent variable. So it's not in my main results. Yes, so I did also do that, and the lag dependent variables turned out to be positive, and for the other dependent variables, the results were generally the same. Yeah. So yes.
Yes, Carol, thank you.
For Meg, especially since our economy is very much related to services exports. Ang question ko lang is, of course, yung OVB, ma'am, I think many people already mentioned that on educational level, trade barriers, tapos yung mga tax policies.
Yeah.
And then the other is multicollinearity. The three independent variables that you mentioned, medyo magkakapareho yata sila. So baka medyo mahit ka doon once you start publishing your paper. But for this, I think the good thing is there are previous papers published, so you can just refer to them and see how they were able to manage these econometric concerns. Yes, that's about it.
Thank you for the suggestions.
Thank you, Carol. I have one question coming from our online participants. If you would allow me to read them and ask the question next. This is from John Paul Parcia. What led to the decrease in export of services in 2020 and 2021, when BPO or outsourcing should have been less affected by the pandemic due to promotion of the work from home setup? If anything, services exports should have picked up due to people preferring work from home jobs during these times.
So I'm not sure about the exact factors, but one of the most affected sectors in services were travel and I believe transport, since people were not able to go out or go into other countries as easily. But as for BPOs, let me check. For BPOs which fall under other business services, for our exports, they actually increased. For other business services where BPOs are classified, they increased during 2020 and 2021 compared to 2019.
I think, Meg, you have a chart in your slide on this. Maybe it will be good to show that was slide number, I think it clearly showed the dip and the improvement afterwards, I think.
For the sectors, I only have this pie chart for 1 year,
All
but
right.
for 2020, if I can't show you here, but for 2020 and 2021, the share for other business services was actually larger compared to 2019.
Okay, so I think
So-
that's why the our online participant maybe misread that there was a chart that showed a
This
dip,
one,
but
this
it's
one.
actually not.
Yes, ma'am. So overall
yes.
po, the exports and imports both declined, but for the specific sector, the other business services actually increased during the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the question, and thank you, Meg, for the clarification and your answers. Let me check if there are. Wait, there's one more from an online participant from Ferrari Fientes. Is politics not considered as a determinant?
I haven't thought about including that yet, but maybe as part of like the general like business environment, I think it would be considered as with other economic variables. I think that would be also something we could consider looking at. So thank you for the suggestions.
Yes, and also maybe to add, Meg, perhaps governance indicators can
Governance, yes.
be sort of a representative of at least the level of when we like to look at politics. If I may also, I wanted Meg to just point out one of your indicators, the CMCI score from DTI. That's a very, very interesting indicator. Unfortunately, it did not become
Ah,
significant in your empirical exercise. I was wondering if you can share with us, like, how many years is it
Yes.
that do these types of indicators cover? Maybe that's a reason. Maybe a longer period would
Ah.
make it better. Thank
Yes.
you.
So for the competitiveness score, it's only from 2015. So it's relatively short, I think. And so for this score measures the competitiveness of cities and municipalities. And so since it's regional, I took the individual from cities and municipalities and also at province level. So I took the provinces per region and computed our regional score to be used in my paper. And so this also covers um, uh, actually this score has a sort of governance component in it as one of the pillars. So I don't have it in my slides, unfortunately, but I describe this score in my paper.
Thank you, Meg. That's if we had a longer series for the indicator, this would be very good, a good indicator, especially in the case of ITBPMs. The subsector of ITBPM is now expanding more towards the regions. Maybe expansion of your study later on when you have more data would be very good. Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the floor or online? Yes, Governor Ellie.
I was struck by the question 2 questions ago or 3 questions ago based on this time series. I would have thought that services exports are more, you're able to work from home more than than for the goods, goods exports. And yet in the graph, the dip is as pronounced as a dip for the other stuff. So it seems that working from home is not a big part of services exports. I don't know if we can look more closely into that. Is it do you see the same thing for different regions? You see the same dip? Maybe some regions it's
Are doing that.
much easier to work from home. So this will be something that you can interact with the availability of telecommunication services or communication services. I don't know, but it's a very interesting phenomenon. I would have thought the opposite would happen.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the suggestion. I think I just have like a guess that as I observed also with students who were forced to have like online classes during the pandemic. So not everybody has equal resources, access when it comes to either internet access, the devices that they need. So I think, yes, there could be the difference in ICT is really a factor in why we during the pandemic work from home or activities that could be done through the internet did not contribute more to increasing trade in services. So yes, I could look into that also. Thank you.
Thank you again, Govelli and Meg, for your response. I just wanted to share, it is not a question, but a comment from one of our online participants, hoping we could improve trade and services among rural or remote areas through financial literacy as well. This is from Luke Medina. Thank you, Luke. Anyone, Govelli, would you like to It's just, I think this is one of our very apparent objectives right now, and that is to really push for financial literacy. Any further questions from the floor or online? We have a few minutes extra. So there being none, thank you again, everyone. Thank you very much, Governor Eli Remolona, for visiting our research huddle. Thank you, dear BSP colleagues, both on-site and online. And thank you very much, Meg, for your insightful and highly informative research paper. Thank you, everyone. We'd like to, before we close the session, I would like to invite everyone to attend our next research huddle, which will be featuring a research paper by one of our very own colleagues from the BSP Research Academy. Principal researcher Veronica B. Bayangos will be presenting the paper, What Drives Cross-Border Flows? This will be on November 8th. Again, same time, 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. via Zoom. It will be also available hybrid format, both on-site and virtually. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon.